Depression, insanity, hatred for existence itself. That is the best way I can describe the works of Takuya Tsutsui, otherwise known as Chaos 9, the sole member of a Japanese black metal band called Endless Dismal Moan. If you haven't heard of Endless Dismal Moan, that's fine, hardly anyone has.
Who the fuck are you?
It's kind of an underground black metal legend. I discovered Endless Dismal Moan a few years ago when I was having my annual black metal phase, as you do, and found their song Vampire on YouTube.
Check it out.
And I became obsessed with this band. Their sound was so completely different from every other black metal band I had ever heard. The band would have help from guitar player Manobu Hiramoto, otherwise known as Lydian 6, but Chaos 9 was the only true member of the band, and so just about everything regarding the band's sound was thought up and created by him. Endless Dismal Moan, which I will refer to as EDM for the sake of convenience, began in 2001 and would perform a few shows around Japan, and release 3 albums before Chaos 9 would unfortunately take his own life in 2008. 2 years later, Sabbathid Records would release a 4th EDM album titled Curse of Underground. And that's it. That paragraph worth of information is all that exists to preserve the history of Endless Dismal Moan, and believe me, I looked. Originally, I wanted this video to be almost a micro-documentary detailing the history of EDM, and while there are plenty more factoids I could list off, like, for example, Chaos 9 is a weeb, there really is nothing I could string together to make a whole video. I got so desperate, I even reached out to Lydian6 on Facebook, and he saw my message but never responded, and I don't blame him. I'm sure he has no interest in talking about his deceased friend with an absolute stranger. And just so you understand how much time I've put into researching Endless Dismal Moan, I started working on this video immediately after my Vampire the Masquerade video on May 6th. So I came to the conclusion that the mini documentary video I wanted to make just was not gonna work out.
Are you mentally unwell? Are you having an emotional breakdown right now?
I just didn't have enough information about the man himself, but what I did have was all 4 of his albums, as they have been preserved on YouTube for anyone to listen to, and so I'm gonna force myself to dive deep into the haunting insanity of Endless Dismal Moan. I'm only gonna focus on the first album in this video, primarily because I would like to upload sometime this year, and also because I think the first album perfectly encapsulates the insanity of Chaos 9's music. Now, I need to establish that this is not the kind of music I listen to in my daily life. I'm one of those people who always has music playing in the background no matter what I'm doing, and I've listened to metal for basically my entire life, but these albums are too intense for even me. I listen to these albums like it's an art exhibit, just sort of peeking in to appreciate the beauty of it all. And so I do have to warn people watching this video, if you're already not doing well mentally, don't listen to these albums. You will suffer because of them. I can hardly bring myself to listen to any of these all the way through without taking a break, even after listening to them multiple times. So yeah, I can't stress enough, these albums are terrifying, like they've been sonically designed to set off your fight or flight response. I know that's kind of a meme to say at this point because of TikTok, like, ooh, don't watch the scary walrus movie, it'll give you nightmares, ooh.
Weenie Hut Juniors!
The first album begins with the track Spell, with a low melodic whisper, like a warning right before the second track kicks in and the thumping heartbeat of the album begins. This track lays the groundwork for the discography of Endless Dismal Moan, with machine gun-like drums, droning guitars, and synthesizers, and the most wicked screaming I have ever heard. I've heard plenty of Fry screaming before, but nothing like this. Chaos 9's panicked and frantic vocals make him sound like he's in genuine pain, like he's desperately trying to scream louder than the mad dash of instruments. I didn't even notice this on my first listen, but there are multiple times throughout the record where Chaos 9's vocals become distorted and start to blend with the ominous, violent instrumentals. From here, the first 3 tracks, Obsession, From Ominous, and Calamitous Box, the instruments become quicker and punchier, and the pained wailing of Chaos 9 sounds angrier and more erratic before finally beginning to slow down and give some breathing room at the end of Calamitous Box. These first few songs are a great example of the way Chaos 9 structures his music. Almost every song on this album translates seamlessly into the next, with melodies that bleed into the chords of the next song. But it's not one continuous stream of sound though, the album does pause between between tracks, but it's the way that the tracks so perfectly carry over the emotion and tone of the last song only to slowly change it and pass it to the next track. It creates a sense of story without ever saying a word, like the album is creating a genuine experience of terror to blend with your emotions as you progress through the album and understand it better. And the way the tone and flow of these tracks change at such a slow burn and never end the same way they begin pretty much, I think, confirms my belief that this album isn't just separated into songs, it's separated into arcs, each of these arcs containing a few songs within themselves, and I think the first 4 songs on this record are the first arc, beginning with Spell and ending with Calamitous Box. To me, this arc of the album sounds like a thunderous arrival, like the almost triumphant drums and the increasing energy with each song create a perfect introduction to the world that Chaos 9 is trying to paint. The next song, Goddess of Death, was the one that really made me appreciate the drums in this album. The whole album very clearly uses a drum machine instead of a real drum kit, and yet manages to sound so incredible with the way it blends ordinary playable sound with beats that are just chaotic enough that perhaps a real person could actually play them. This is the first album I've ever heard that I think actually sounds better because of a drum machine and not real drums. I'm kind of a hypocrite for saying that since I own an E-kit, but unfortunately I have a thing called Neighbors and real drum kits are loud as shit. But anyway, Goddess of Death is the first song on this album that actually kind of sounded like a normal black metal song. I really enjoyed the guitar riffs, and when the song transitions into a barking breakdown, it's the most headbangable part of the album by far. Vampire is the most widely known song by Endless Dismal Moan, which is to say that it's the only one of their songs that actually gets posted to YouTube by itself and actually gets any views. I feel your pain, Chaos 9.
Nobody likes you!
It's also one of the few live performances we still have footage of. In total, I only know of 6 live performances that have been preserved on YouTube, all of which can be found on this channel, which I'm pretty sure is a fucking liar. Regardless, this channel has done the world a great service by preserving these live shows. I've watched all of these performances, and damn, Chaos 9 is a very good performer. The whole time he's on stage, he moves around in such an unnatural way, and in total contrast to the previously mentioned Lydian 6 playing guitar right next to him.
Wacky waving inflatable arm flailing tube man. Wacky waving inflatable arm flailing tube man. Wacky waving inflatable arm flailing tube man.
The first time I watched one of these shows, I actually thought to myself, wait, is Chaos 9 a girl? The very few times you can actually see their face in these videos, they're wearing a ton of makeup and their silhouette is androgynous to say the least. Also, the few pictures of Chaos 9 that are still around depict a very feminine person, but everyone who talks about them online refer to Chaos as a he.
Fucking pronouns!
So I'll just take the word of random strangers that he is a dude, and just a really good performer. But anyway, I think the reason why this song is the most popular track of the album is that it furthered the traditional black metal sound Goddess of Death had. It's probably the most generic song on this album, which is far from saying it really is generic or boring. I just feel that after the first 3 songs of the album did such an amazing job establishing the sound of Endless Dismal Moan, these 2 songs immediately are just kind of a drop-off. I still love Vampire and Goddess of Death, but these 2 tracks sort of just sound like Chaos 9 is just coasting by until he finds new and creative ways to terrify the listener. And Chaos certainly delivers on that in the next 2 tracks, Gloom and Self-Titled.
Mother of God, it's all toilet sounds.
Gloom is the closest thing to an interlude that this sick, twisted album has, with groaning chords that loop for a few minutes. It's very hard to explain, but the way this track is so repetitive and quiet compared to the rest of these tracks is just so unsettling. There was many points on the album where I actually had to take a break and go do something else because the album was just making me so uncomfortable and anxious. The way it worms its way into your head and sticks with you is what makes this album so incredible. It's almost like forcing yourself to watch gore. You get used to it after a while, but you'll probably end up with a few videos with live leak watermarks burned into your psyche forever. But Gloom is just the calm before the storm, as the next track, Self-Titled, is the pinnacle of this record, and very much worthy of being the track named after the band. The pace of the track constantly speeds up and slows down at a whim, like the instruments are fighting with themselves, and the screaming on this track is by far the most haunting sound Chaos 9 has produced so far, not by sounding demonic or inhuman, but by actually doing a 180 and for the first time sounding like a real human being. Throughout this album, the primary aspect of Chaos 9's vocals is just how dissonant they are from the instrumental. By that I mean the vocals never sound like they're trying to accommodate or work with the guitars or drums or any instrument. In fact, the screams don't sound voluntary at all. They sound tortured and pained, like Chaos 9 is wailing for help, but the only noise he can muster is this possessed screaming. And the many periods of silence from Chaos feed into this perfectly. The instruments do try to follow along with Chaos's sporadic wailing, but never manages to shake the feeling of being held hostage. And now on this track, Chaos sounds like he's almost managed to escape the music for a brief moment with this nauseated crying at the beginning, which is almost instantly replaced by Chaos 9's usual demonic fry screams. Like the track is putting its mask back on and trapped Chaos 9 back inside, only for Chaos 9's disoriented cries to come back and accompany the fry screams we've become accustomed to. The feeling of Chaos 9 losing himself in a psychotic break is projected so perfectly in this track. The next track, Talking Mind, just makes the self-titled track that much more memorable by being the complete opposite. This song begins with a clock-like chiming that continues on throughout the duration of the song, almost drowning out everything else and creating an unnerving presence, like counting down until something dreadful. All the while, Chaos 9's vocals completely shift and join the harmony of instruments accommodating the chime. The tortured, wild wailing of Chaos in the previous track has been completely assimilated into a repeating structured chant, like some twisted, possessed incantation. At some point, a new voice appears on the track, very similar to the whispering voice heard at the beginning of the album. This voice seems to ag on the twisted, ritualistic chanting before leaving the song to repeat itself over and over and over again, like a ride you're not allowed off of. The last track of this arc of the album is Abyss, and that is a perfect title for this track. The song begins with a scratchy, distorted synth noise and absolutely nothing else. The suffocating isolation of the track goes on for what feels like an eternity. The evil-sounding guitars and drums and the terrifying vocals of the previous tracks become distant memories as the song just lies still. All the incomprehensible machinations that the previous tracks incorporated have led to this abyss of dead silence, like a game over screen. This song portrays one emotion perfectly: hopelessness. That is until this rolling, muffled, pulsing sound begins to play, like blood rushing into your ears with a resuscitated heartbeat. The distant thunder-like sound becomes an immediate comfort in the stagnant ocean of nothing this track is so masterfully created. It makes you listen to this track with your ears perked up, waiting for some kind of new sound to come by and accompany the pulsing, but the track just continues on, further and further into an abyss. The scratchy synth sound that saturated every waking moment of the song begins to shift in key and speed up ever so slightly, becoming even more aggressive, like this suffocating abyss finally swallowing up the listener into its nothingness. The track continues on and on and on to the point your brain almost begins to tune it out. Here I honestly can't tell if the song is actually distorting or if it's just my brain not being able to handle a full 11 minutes of this torturous sound. I can tell this will be the track that many people, when they listen to this album, will either skip or stop listening altogether. It's so far down the rabbit hole of EDM's twisted, haunting sound that it can't even be considered music anymore. It's just horrifyingly isolating, mind-warping ambience. The next couple tracks drop off in quality tremendously. The song Chaos, not the guy, the song, begins with a blood-curdling siren that blares in total contrast to the previous track's subtle ambience. After that track, Kid-A-Guy has a much more powerful attitude to it. The vocals just sound angry and the instruments are sounding much more metalcore in this batch of song. Like this is something you could actually listen to while gaming. Bloody Claws continues this sound until we reach self-titled again? Yeah, so the second self-titled song definitely doesn't carry the vibes as well as the previous self-titled track, but it is a surprisingly groovy song that still has amazing ambience. It does sort of replicate the terror that previous tracks had by having this avant-garde choir sound be the primary component to the track, as well as bringing back those crying sounds from earlier. However, these tracks do an amazing job of just being chaotic and violent and pretty much everything black metal fans like. The final tracks of Endless Dismal Moan seem weirdly celebratory for such a bleak and hopeless album, which, I mean, that still isn't saying much. These two tracks are still dark and heavy and certainly nothing you would play around your family, but within the context of the album, they sound vibrant and blaring, like the album has come to whatever dark, twisted conclusion it was leading the listener to. Calamity does this much more succinctly, barely hitting the 2-minute mark, but feeds into the final song Death Odor perfectly, with its distorted guitars and snarling vocals before it cuts out, leaving the listener with these petrifying sounds that seem far away yet right behind you at the same time. With one final chord, the song fades out and a whispering voice identical to the one at the beginning of the album says something incomprehensible and disappears. This album is fucking legendary. To this day, I think it is one of, if not the best black metal project I've ever heard. And this was just EDM's first album. Chaos 9 would release 2 more in the following years. But as I'm sure you've noticed if you've made it this far in the video, Chaos 9's music is dark to say the least. Chaos 9 has stated that the music he made was a reflection of his declining mental state, and just thinking about what kind of headspace one would need to be in to project this kind of terror into their art is unsettling. I think there's no doubt that Chaos was a very disturbed person. Some fans even speculate that he suffered from psychosis. And sadly, it seems that Chaos never got the help he desperately needed, as in 2008 he committed suicide. It truly is a tragedy that such a talented person would be haunted by such dark feelings that he would take his own life. But I have no doubt that if Chaos could see the cult following he's gained and all the people who love his music, I'm sure it would bring him some kind of peace. I hope in this video I managed to convey just how amazingly terrifying and beautiful this album is. I've never found any music that could worm its way into my head and fuck with me like this album can. I've had music make me uneasy before, with things like Harsh Noise Wall being the most notable example, but I've never had an album actually manage to convey true horror like this one can. If you're a fan of being scared or you just simply love black metal, I highly recommend giving this album a listen. If you're like me and want to know more about Chaos 9, there's an interview he did back in 2006 with this channel, so check that out if you want. Anyway, happy Halloween, and I am inside of your walls.